Hello, hello. This is Laura from Healing with Spirit. Welcome to an episode of Triggers in Spiritual Medicine, where our whole goal of our program is to really show others the way of solution of breaking what I see as an endemic of the perpetuation of unhealed, unresolved trauma in all areas of our life, where there's an intersection or a weave that affects racism, to domestic violence, to homelessness, to LGBTQ, to indigenous rights. There's this weave. And what our goal is to help take the world by storm by breaking the silent epidemic of this trauma, and with an innovative approach by bringing in a collaboration with industry experts, survivors who have figured out the how, or at least brought in questions to how do we heal this effects and break free through the chains, so we can really change this dynamic of what has now become an endemic. Okay. And I'm excited to bring in Ray. She is considered a dialogue facilitator, a culture builder, a communication strategist, a healing navigator, and an intuitive arts practitioner. She's also a breast cancer survivor. She lives in Plainville, Vermont, and she has a lot of experience navigating the cancer and trauma with a background in communications, and is very much engaged in anti-racism work, and is the founder of EmpowR, where she embodies her life purpose as one small player that she has shared her work and healed the heart of humanity. Welcome, Ray. Thank you so much for joining me. I know what sparked this conversation, me wanting to bring you on, was the topic of, a post that you wrote on the burning times of witches and the influence of white women culture today. And I must say that is probably one of the most profound readings I think I have read in recent years, on really connecting the dots of so many areas of from areas of anti-racism work to domestic violence to even spiritual community, women's rights. I mean, there's so many things now. Is like going, yay, oh my gosh, like very eye-opening. Can you please share what inspired you, and how were you able to connect these dots the way you did?
Thank you so much, Laura, for having me on your show, on the podcast. Yeah, I would say over the course of the past 4 years, from when I was originally diagnosed with breast cancer, which was January 2018, there was kind of these three areas that I was really uncovering beyond like the breast cancer diagnosis piece, really getting into deeper healing and deeper trauma healing. And one was really looking at the sources of, as you say, triggers in my body, triggers in my behavior, of like the self-sabotaging behaviors that I was enacting through the course of my life, that helped lead to such a health crisis, and really how it stemmed from trauma in my life that I was unaware of. So there was kind of an unpacking of that. There was also a wanting to look into like the resiliency of my ancestors and my heritage, as I was going through breast cancer, and really trying to tap into like some inner strength. And as I started to go into that process, really looking for resiliency, I started to unpack the truth of what my ancestors have also done as white European colonizers and religious folks. And that kind of unraveled into this exploration of epigenetics, intergenerational and historical trauma, and just really digging into that, drawing on Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, a lot. I kind of read that afterwards, but there was a parallel of kind of starting to explore that historical trauma. And then at the same time, I was going through my own process of awakening my healing powers. So in strengthening my intuition, really realizing my wise women ancestry. And so kind of all of those things happening at the same time on different timelines really helped me dig into this root cause analysis and I'm a root cause analysis kind of person. And that helped me really begin to tap into this whole truth of the ancestry, the colonization, the capitalism, the racism. And I think just kind of two other thoughts on that, right? Like capitalism and dominant culture was one of the big factors in the cancer in my mind, body, spirit, kind of unraveling. So that was a root cause for me, one of many root causes. And doing this exploration, I started to go farther and farther back in time. And that was where I really started to uncover like what was happening to women, what was happening to white women, that lives in my body to this day.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you brought up in there's like, why do white women cut each other out? Why do we not support each other? Why do we even feel this need? And I know, like when I was reading it, one of the things that struck was like, and even how you bring it into the burning times, right? And all those things that happened during the Middle Ages, even go back a little further, and it's like, wow, how those that had the power, those that were leading matriarchal societies were murdered. And if you spoke out, it was actually an incentive for white women to oust other white women. If you didn't follow in tow, you were murdered, you were burned, you were hung, you were decapitated, you were tortured, right? And so we have hundreds of years of that being bred into our very DNA. That was kind of like an aha moment for me. Can you explain where that all kind of came from?
Yeah, absolutely. And to clarify, right, we weren't even considered white women back then, right? This is Western, European women. This is how it's kind of transpired through into white woman culture today. And I think, one thing that I'll look at is like, I was pulling up the descriptor of the article. And I think I just want to read this. So this is about a revealing look at how white women's trauma responses to the Christian church's genocide of European women has unraveled over time into the energies that perpetuate the toxicity of white supremacy culture. And this is an exploration into how white women taking personal responsibility for those behaviors contributes to personal and collective healing, emotional and spiritual health, and dismantling racism and oppression. So as you say, it's big and complex. And there are some numbers that estimate that over 60,000 to 200,000 women were killed. And some estimations are up to 9 million, right? Like we don't have historical records of this because of the patriarchy, but ultimately this whole, the Christian church was threatened by the power of women. And as you said, right, the burning, the tortures, the raping, and all of this that was perpetuated by a mob mentality, and really a huge public relations campaign against women and taking women out of medicine and taking women out of their power. If you think about how that happened and what women were doing to one another, we were being forced to separate. We were being forced to uncommunity with one another. And we turned each other in. We turned each other in to save our skins, to save our babies, to save our families, to feed our families. Because there was such deep manipulation going on to separate us. And so if we look at what happens over hundreds of years of that kind of behavior, right, it's created this culture around fear, betrayal, mistrust, ultimately competition and envy, and silence.
Do you feel like it even plays into the role of we think of, when I think of like Cinderella and Snow White, and when women were in power, they were equal in some of these cultures where they were actually equal to men in some of these cultures, right? And especially Northern European cultures, if we're talking some of the Celtic and maybe some of the Nordic cultures, especially, that some of these women were in equal power. And some of them were warriors, and fought alongside their men. And do you think that plays into some of the mentality where, like, I know at least when I grew up, it was you got to marry you got to marry Prince Charming, somebody who's going to take care of you, somebody that's going to provide for you, and you're just to basically bear children and cook and clean, and why this is about why you got to look a certain way to marry a rich guy to boot too. Like, where does this mentality come from, right? White picket fences and everything else.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, and yeah, if we peel it back, it's the Inquisition. Before the dawn of capitalism and before the Inquisition and the Christian church's power takeover, I mean, we lived communally. We were indigenous to the lands of Europe. We were all indigenous to someplace. And it was this privatized land piece that was a big part of starting to break away the communal societies that we lived in. And through the institutions of the church, creating the constructs of marriage, the constructs of living with one person. I mean, before that, there was all sorts of people living with different people. Women lived with women. There was different types of sexual relationships. I mean, all of those things. And that was all what the white men wanted to crush and control, based on their own egos and all of their own, their own things going on there. And so it's separated, and it created this whole norm around you're a worker bee to the man, and you're a housewife, and you are in service to the man in church. Life hasn't always been that way, but it has for 1,000 years, and it comes back to that time, and what was happening in Europe. To really to genocide and control women and to make them servants of men.
I think of, some of the work I've been doing with trauma survivors, whether domestic violence, rape survivors, is what I guess what the terminology would be like decolonization work. Because one of the things I started recognizing in some of the anti-racism work that I was doing was like how many victims would come and how they self-shame. So they actually perpetuate the continuation of abuse after the abuse is done, not even recognizing that's what's happening because of a conditioning, right? It's like, here's this rape survivor who comes out of a bar, her clothes are tattered, she's bloodied and bruised. And what do we do as a culture? We say, why were you there? Why did you wear a skirt? So why weren't you wearing underwear? Why did you drink 3 drinks? You should have known better. You were asking for it, right? And instead of saying, who did this to you? Who did this to you? Like, where does this ideology, I kept always wondering for almost 20 years now doing trauma work, wondering where does this ideology come from? And then again, it goes right into a lot of things that you mentioned. Like when I was reading your piece, I was going like, yes, because even when it came to those times with the women too, part of taking over another culture was actually raping the women, and it was acceptable, and I think fairly recently, if I'm not mistaken, and if anybody who's listening wants to correct me, please do. But if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the state of, or was a city, I think it was Kansas, if I'm not mistaken, they were trying to make it where it was legal, if it was spousal. I think that law was overturned, but it was fairly recent in the last 5 years where some of the ideology is still here, whether it passed or didn't pass. To me, it says that there's enough people that still believe that this should be okay, right?
Absolutely.
And how many women make excuses for men that rape women or abuse them?
Yeah. I mean, all of it. I'm thinking back to a time when I was attacked walking home from a bar in a short skirt. And when the police showed up, that was the first thing was like, well, are you sure you didn't fall? Just completely not believing anything that I had to say and questioning it.
So how were you able to connect like your experience? What was the aha moment for you to connect your experience? Because when you connected like a way you were writing it and connected it to the burning times, like that was like a big like smack upside the head, like, yes, where's the root? How, like, what was the aha moment for you?
I don't know if there was no one aha moment, but it was through that process that I kind of laid out at the beginning, like those three pieces. And I know one piece that was coming up a lot for me was really examining my own lack of compassion. I mean, a really sad moment for me was early on in my diagnosis, just, crying to my partner, why is this happening? And of course, in mainstream medicine, they're like, oh, it just happens. And I'm like, no, nothing just happens. Right. So I was, digging into this, like what's happening. And my partner said to me very, very open-heartedly, he said, you could have more compassion for people. And that was a big, deep start of unraveling, of starting to see how I had become in the corporate communications world, which was the world that I worked in, like in the rat race of serving the patriarchy. I had become somebody I didn't like anymore. I became somebody who did lack compassion and empathy, and who was just so focused on earning a living and, working through my ego and just serving the rat race, serving dominant culture, not because I wanted to, but out of survival. And so I really started to look back, like through my ancestry, through the women in my family line, and being like, where did this come from? Right? Like, where did this kind of like apathetic, cruel, just like matter of fact, yep, that's how it is, we got to just button it up, like put on the bootstraps, right? Like that whole mentality, like where did that come from? And so just doing some digging through some historical records, but also in the dream time, definitely through meditation, through tapping in with the earth, and also through a lot of different readings. And the article has a lot of articles that I read that kind of helped inform some of this. And I just started to pull these different hypotheses together. And one of the things that you said because I was kind of thinking and then got brought back to that moment when I had that experience that I shared with the police. There's also this part with kind of dominant culture and men of just the not believing women, right? Like women are just crazy and you're just your intuition and you feel too much and blah, blah, blah. And all of these messages, which are all, if you think about it, and if you peel back the layers of 1,000 years, those were our powers, right? Like part of my medicine and my magic and my power is being a super intuitive person. And over time, watching that get squashed out of me because that's just crazy. You don't have any data for that, right? Like there's no facts for that. And that entire mentality is a part of what has stripped women away from our power, and which plays in, like you said, in domestic violence and all sorts of different places in culture, is that we're not believed, because how could we believed if we're coming from an emotional place or coming from coming from a place that is just our inner knowing, because how could inner knowing be viable in a patriarchal system? So I think those things we're tapping into it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it brings to mind two things just listening to you. One, it brings me to mind of, and I think it was around 2014, the Fox News station in LA did an expose of the system, and they had a whistleblower judge, because 58,000 children are legally trafficked by way of family courts to domestic abusers and rapists every year. And it's something that nobody talks about, because again, the women who are making the accusations of domestic violence, child abuse, or sexual abuse are deemed crazy. And if you make allegations of sexual abuse, you actually have a higher rate of losing custody of your children than you do if it's just domestic violence, which like goes to the opposite, right? And this whistleblower judge talked about, her name is Judge Salcido, and she's now a retired judge in California who does advocacy work now. And but I remember her talking about her case and what made her a whistleblower, because she went to judicial school, and how she was taught how to automatically disqualify mothers making any allegations of abuse, because they must be on their period, or they must be exaggerating, or they're just crazy. And she didn't believe one mother's accusations of sexual abuse of her daughter. and she gave custody to the father. 2 years later, that father was convicted and sent to prison for raping the daughter's friend. And she said she couldn't sleep anymore because this was how the system was teaching her, right? And it also brings to like, I don't know, the invention of the vibrator. When I think of the movie like Freud and things and how they would manually stimulate women because they were hysterical, right? The whole idea of hysteria. And they would send women back in the day to an insane asylum because they were just, there was something wrong with them. And it just really, how much we really enforce that instead of saying, geez, you know, that's a trauma response. What happened to you? How can we support you? You know, instead of victim blaming and shaming, how do we, you know, become a culture that is so cruel? I mean, we see it now more than ever, right? It's just gotten worse. And and the things that you bring up in this post, it just, I feel like there's like a tentacle to every aspect of our lives, and how whether it's education, domestic violence, homelessness, equity in jobs, right? Equal pay to, but it really, the thing that struck out is how do we solve it is we need to catch ourselves when we feel threatened by a fellow female, you know, and instead of feeling threatened, how can we support and build community, which I think community is a challenge. We don't know what community looks like anymore.
No, because it was taken away. It was taken away from us. It was completely taken away from us. And you know, I really resonate with what you were saying around something you were saying before. There's so many different thoughts going through my head. So just let me center for a minute and try to pull them together. There's such a rich topic and it goes in so many different places.
Sure does.
One of the things I'm thinking about is like and you've mentioned this before, like the dominant traits, right? So if we have been persecuted and punished for speaking out, for advocating for something, for being emotional, for, you know, saying that we're not crazy, whatever it is, over time, those traits have been like weeded out of kind of the mass populace of white women of European descent. And so these traits are these like who assimilates the best to the patriarchy. And that's who gets to go on top. I mean, that's certainly what was happening to me before I was diagnosed with cancer, was having to, you know, having to assimilate to a world that that really isn't in alignment at all with who I am. And over time, right, we've got this whole group of white women, not everybody, right, but just if we're kind of looking at the masses that are in this place of not being able to be in community with each other, not being able to listen and trust one another, that like the gaslighting, you know, all of these different behaviors that have come up. And then I want to make sure that I touch upon race, because that's a big piece that is a focus of the article, which is, you know, I come back to this point of, if white women aren't safe for each other, how can we be safe for women of color? And one of the things the reasons why I wrote this article was many women of color were asking me, because I am in trusting relationship with several women of color, and they were like, why is it that white women are so competitive and backstabbing and betrayal, like regardless of like the blatant racism, and then regardless of the microaggressions, if I was speaking for a Black person, like I don't trust white women. Like, even if you show up and you do the things, there's something I don't trust about you. And I've heard this from many women of color. Why is that? Because other women in other cultures, like, we're in community, we support each other. We don't do this thing that white women do. And so part of the exploration into this article and like why I wrote it was trying to come up with an answer to that for women of color. And it was like, oh, duh. Why don't we get along with each other? If we look at our history and what we did to each other, and if we look at things through that historical trauma lens, we turned on each other. And so we still are living out those behaviors in the ways that we engage and communicate with each other. And, I know you and I are both all about community and both do different, things in the world of kind of building community. And yeah, white women, many don't understand what that is. And there's such a fear response to even step into getting out of the house, doing something that's not in service to the husband, that's not in service to the partner, that's not in service to the family, that's not in service to the grandparents, that's not in service to the school, that's not in service to the house. And actually doing something that's fully in service to us and our own healing, right? The guilt that comes up from people of thinking of like self-care and self-love is like some kind of, excessive, extra thing that you need to do, rather than like what is most important for our ability to show up in the world and to be a part of the world we want to see. And stepping into community, being able to prioritize doing something that's not about being in service to all of these other beings in your life. And that's really in service to this work. And it's such a fear response. Every woman that I work with, it's like, there's always a reason to not gather in community.
It's interesting that you bring that up. And even with the race, if I can add to that, is, I saw a phenomena happen after the George Floyd, because I'm very active in the domestic violence community, and I have a lot of colleagues that are advocates. And I saw an interesting phenomena happen with survivors, and I really saw it as a trauma response, and they were missing the point of why understanding racism and doing and learning anti-racism work and doing that whole work, how that would even help you with your custody issues, and how that would help you with your stalking issues, and how that will help you keep your children safe, from sexual predators, and not understanding the link between the two. And this is what I'm hoping to do with this whole program that we're doing, is helping understand that one isn't exclusive over the other, that there's more in common than not. And if we support this cause, it actually helps our own, and vice versa. And, and that's to me important. And I know even from being in community, I remember the first time I went into a community setting, I almost left. It created a trigger response because I had never, and the first time I was ever in community, I was in my mid 40s. So for 40 something years, being constantly ousted, constantly being tossed out, always, I was even incarcerated for advocating and trying to help bring issue in Massachusetts with domestic violence, and how I was incarcerated without ever being charged, without ever being accused of a crime, and while also being denied my right to a lawyer. Again, understanding my plea also understands where folks of color complain about this all the time, but we don't hear them, right? And in community, when I finally got a chance to say like, oh, this is what I'm really craving, it ended up being a trauma response where I didn't know. And I'm like, I don't belong here. I'm going to act stupid. I'm going to say something that's going to hurt, like all these, I call them the irrational thoughts, right? The irrational thoughts that surface. But I always say, if you don't acknowledge the irrational thoughts, they start to consume you, and then it's knowing when to stop, when to pause, take a breath. And part of community is having folks say, you know what, it's okay. You're okay. You're safe. Everything is okay. And you're still supported. And I just, I'm only bringing that up because I want some of the white women to not, if you have those experiences, to not give up, to like maybe understand that you're actually, maybe this is what you need, right? Or maybe it's a matter of finding a different community that you do feel safe. Because I think we need this, especially moving forward in 2022. We need community. We need the support. We need to rebuild these things that were stolen from us, right? So now what I would like to ask you is, what's the medicine? What now that we've kind of given this like veil of the triggers and some of the root issues to the triggers of what this is, what are 3 things that you would say to somebody watching this that they can do for themselves or for their community moving forward?
Yeah, I really appreciate you framing it that way, Laura, because this whole emotional wellness and our own healing, right? Like, even if we don't have a disease per se, or we think there's not something wrong, we all have healing to do. And it is in this unpacking of how we show up, where we may cause harm to ourselves, where we may cause harm to others, especially in our behaviors, our actions, our words. And if we're white women of European ancestry, this stuff, it's breathing and breeding inside of us, because of our own genocide and because of the way that we have perpetuated racism through the dominant behaviors that we portray as a part of white supremacy culture. No, whether we're a white supremacist or not, that has nothing to do with it. It lives within all of us, and so that's very triggering to people. And I really love what you said around looking at right, like how it's all intersected. And so the entry point for somebody might not be, oh, I'm going to do anti-racist work. And it might not be, I'm going to do healing work because I have a disease. It might be, how do I really look at my behaviors and take responsibility for just how I show up, in with my family, with my friends, with people of color, with people in the community, with people at the grocery store, with, how I just show up. And so this ability to get in touch with our nervous system and really tap into what does trigger us. What are we projecting onto other people? Really getting in touch with, where do we have judgments and how are we putting our judgments on other people because we see people doing something different from us, whether they're a person of color, whether they're a friend who has changed and we're not comfortable with the change that friend has gone through, whether it's our child and they're going through some things that are also triggering us, right? It can come from many places. So when we feel triggered about something, there's this being able to connect with our nervous system, notice what's happening in our bodies, and be able to be like, wait a minute, why am I judging this person, thing, place, whatever, when really it's about something that's inside of me that I have to heal. So anytime we feel like we're jumping to a judgment or a should, or shoulding somebody or shoulding ourselves, should is a great test word for that. It's really an indicator that we do have personal work to do. So I think that first thing is it's being able to tap into our nervous system, because how are we ever going to be able to advocate for our needs, for other people's needs, speak up for those who have more oppressed identities or who are in a challenging situation, if we aren't able to actually speak up and do so in a way that tends to our nervous system and our discomfort. So that's the first thing. A second thing is really being able to, another word to get out of our vocabulary, should is one, is crazy, get the word out of our vocabulary, right? And be able to tap into our inner knowing and our intuition, and really listen to, what is it that my body is telling me? What is it that there's another voice that's telling me, like, oh, wait, pay attention to this, right? And getting rid of these expectations and these ways that we're supposed to be, and everything having to be about data and science and everything in this like box, to be able to see what other kind of information is available through our connection with the earth, through our connection with ourselves, through our ability to just stop, slow down, pause, breathe, and just listen. Just, what are we hearing? What are we feeling? And being in nature, connecting to a tree, connecting to the tree roots is a wonderful way to start to be able to just hear something else. And for people who don't have access to nature, really being able to even just get outside, right? And be able to work with breath work, where we're blocking out other things that are happening and we're just able to listen within. We're so afraid of doing that, because when we start to do that, it starts to unravel what we need to heal. And that's really scary for us, which is why we want to know how to support our nervous systems if we're going to start to do that work. But it's the work, it's the work for us. And, the third thing, I mean, you mentioned it already, is how can we be in community? right? And it's like, we may not be ready to be in community if we haven't attended to some of our own physical and emotional needs first. So there's like this ability to find support. Like one of the things I offer people is healing navigation support, so that it's like, what's the first step to take that's going to look different for everybody. Because to get to that place of being able to be in the community, and the communities gathering with other women, like it can be triggering. And so being able to be in touch enough with yourself and your healing process to know what's coming up for you, because all of this is unpacking trauma. It's all trauma healing, regardless of if somebody has been violated or if we've all been violated, just by the nature of being women and having gone through what we have gone through for the past 1,000 years. So I guess that would be my answer. I think there's a flow, and yeah, I think just kind of plugging my services is that's, I do healing navigation work with people, intuitive arts work, and really tapping into like, what's the first step? What's the next step? How do we listen to our inner knowing? And that might mean developing a support system, like with somebody like you and different folks who are working in the healing places, where I'm doing this kind of, it's like baby steps for people who are just starting to tap into this stuff, right? They might not be ready to put on, a goddess wreath and go to a circle and dance around with a bunch of pagans. That might be really, really, really scary for them. But maybe just like developing their own relationship with nature, and learning how to listen to their intuition a little bit more. So that's some of what I offer that I wanted to make sure I plugged there. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. No, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's similar, we have intersections, right? Because there's a course that I teach that's called Harness the Secrets to Your Power. And it comes from my work doing the domestic violence community, right? It's always that old adage saying, how do we just let go? And people say, why don't you just let go? Why can't you just get over it? Like, just let it go. And I used to always say, if I knew how, I would have done that a long time ago. But meanwhile, the coals are burning in my hands and they won't get unstuck. My hands are stuck and I don't know why, So it goes into, like at least in the process, like I know I do, we call it the power of the pause, the power of the word, and the power of processing, right? So, and it's like, how do you just let go? You hit it like on those spots, right? And it's, for you talk about attending to the nervous system, but you don't know what's misfiring. You don't know what's triggering until you can stop, until you can pause, until you can give enough space where you can get the clarity in the space to know when you go, oh shit, right? Yeah. And this is where the part of processing, because when you finally start to process something, then you know what action to take.
Yeah. And can I bounce in with one more piece on that? Is that we have time? Yeah. Yeah, one of the articles that I wrote going through cancer was on how to let go. It was my process of like, okay, because I would hear it from people, especially people who I triggered, like, you just got to let go of it. It was like,
that just makes you more angry, right?
It just makes you more angry, right? Like, so I had to go through my own process of what does it mean? And a lot of it came back to being in the body, right? Embodiment is a big amount of the work that I practice in equity work, in healing work, is really being in our bodies and really recognizing what is happening in our bodies. And so a lot of the letting go, like there's actually some physical letting go that we need to do. I was talking with a woman who's gone through sexual abuse yesterday, was doing a healing navigation session. And we got to kind of like a first step for her is just the practice of releasing, like just getting energy off from, not from the whole sexual encounter, but just from like a conversation earlier in the day, like just being able to shake and release. And I think I want to like be able to conclude with this, like, some big thought here that I want to share with your audience and share with you. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately around the body and around the historical kind of the whole past. And if we look at where we are right now, because we're in such a deep evolution as a species, right? We're going through deep, huge unravelings and we're in major human evolution. And what we're evolving to is being able to heal. We're evolving to be able to integrate our intellectual brains, our hearts, and our gut instincts. And what if we look way back in time before, when we were all indigenous to somewhere, right? We were operating from that gut instinct. We were operating from that fight, flight, freeze kind of place, right? We were the reptile brain, right? That was how we moved, right? We move into kind of the the past, not the past 1,000 years,
We had
but
it as power.
BC to to then, right? And we were operating from the emotion. We were operating from the heart. We were making decisions based on just feeling and instinct and how we wanted to how we wanted to feel. And then we move into what's been the past 1,000 years, which is moving up into the brain. So the emotional body was in charge before, which would be very much a part of matriarchal society. And then we move up into the brain, and all of a sudden, the men got to grow big brains, and the intellectualizing started, and the industrial, moving into the industrial revolution. And we were operating from just intellect and making every decision based on that, right? And I mean, there's been many advancements with that, and there's positives and negatives to everything. But where we're at now is an integration of the three.
Yeah.
So it's integrating all of those, and to be able to integrate all of those, that's like a core component of holistic healing, of wholeness, of bringing ourselves to wholeness. And that's our evolutionary process. That's our path right now. That's what's happening, whether we like it or not. And it's not everybody's path to be on it right now, right? We all have a different path, but that is the ultimate work, which is why this integration of our bodies, of our emotions, of our guts into the process of how we create a culture of healing. It is the work, and it's work that more and more people are waking up to very quickly right now on this planet.
Well, you kind of hit the nail on the head, because from a numerology standpoint, the word for the year is integration. And I just tell people it's integration with soul and ego, or spirit and the human shell, right? So it's that integration, and we have a triple two, so it's the balance between masculine, feminine, ego, soul, right? Light and dark.
Light and dark, yeah. Good and
So,
bad.
and the six has been showing up, and I go, that to me is just relational. I mean, it's a lover's card and tarot cards, but it's also a very relational, and it's the number when you add like six and you do a triple six, and Christianity, they go, ooh, yeah, ooh, right? And they go, ooh, right? And I go, that's because six is about family. Six is about relationships. Six is about what's your relationship with spirit, what's your relationship with yourself, what your relationship with soul and self. And then knowing what the relationship is with everybody else. So it's going to be a very interesting year. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to working again in the future. How would folks be able to find you?
Yes, I have a website. It is EmpowR-transformation.com. EmpowR is spelled without the E, but either one will get you there. I'm on all the social medias, EmpowR Transformation or Ray Carter EmpowR. I think the website is the best place. And, I do work with people, and I do work with organizations, and also, run a community with a bunch of different co-creators. So there's a lot of different entry points for folks to tap in. And you said it, Laura, relationships. And that's where I've taken my communication career and have woven it into something completely different, which is not about how we communicate externally in a capitalistic society. It's how do we communicate and relate to one another as we're going through this integration process. So yeah, EmpowR-transformation.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This has been so amazing. And for those watching, please make sure you leave your comments, share, follow, do all that good stuff, because none of us are getting paid. And the only way for us to be able to make sure is to also share the content. The whole point of this process is for collaboration. These episodes don't get out there unless we have folks like you that also share them widely. So please help us share, help us be part of the solution to help break the endemic of trauma and be part of the medicine. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day, everybody. Make sure you leave your comments too. Have a great day.